Hello, welcome to Outdoors in Scotland. Hello, welcome to Outdoors in Scotland. My name's John Burns, and this is my podcast for folk who like the outdoors in Scotland, or pretty well anywhere else for that matter. This is the first time we've had a contest on Outdoors in Scotland. It's a contest between me in my hot tent and a man who's familiar with igloos and ice and snow and all that kind of thing. My guest today is Andrew Terrill. He's the author of The Earth Beneath My Feet and On Sacred Ground, two fantastic books, and he's really just someone who really enjoys getting out into the outdoors. And we're going to discuss the various merits of igloos and my hot tent, and we'll see who wins, I guess. Hi, Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me back on your show.
Well, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Now, you live in Colorado, so it's a very different environment from Scotland. Can you tell us well, when did you start? When was the first time you started to get into igloo building?
Well, I built my first igloo in 2016.
Right,
I think the process started so much earlier because,
right.
all of our influences impact how we live our lives going way back to childhood.
Yes, yes.
And so for me, I put the igloo building process back to being a little 7-year-old kid in the suburbs of London, desperate for snow. And your children love snow because of
Absolutely.
its transformative power.
Yes.
Of course, as a 7-year-old, you aren't able to frame it that way. But as a kid, I saw snow as something that sometimes meant no school, which of course is the holy grail of childhood. I saw how it transformed the landscape into something completely different. You wake up in the morning and suddenly it's white and soft and totally different, as though you've traveled 3,000 miles north to the Arctic. And I saw how it transformed the behavior of adults around me. Suddenly they became playful and fun and they wanted to go outside and throw snowballs. I thought as a little child, that was pretty cool. So I love snow, not just because it was beautiful, but because it changed everything. But I remember one time when we had a rare heavy snowfall in Pinner in northwest London.
Uh-huh.
By heavy, I mean, 2 inches. That
Yeah.
was shockingly heavy to me as a child. And so it was beautiful. And I wanted to go out and romp with my three brothers and build, little snow walls to throw snowballs at each other from
Yeah, yeah.
behind. But I had a horrible cold.
Oh
And
no.
my
Okay.
my mum, understandably said, "No, you can't go outside and play in the snow. You're only going to make it worse." So I was looking through the window at my three brothers having a great time, and there I was stuck inside. And my mum, because she loved me, despite not letting me go out to play in the snow, packed some snow into a little ice cream tub and brought it into the house. And so I sat there sadly in the corner building a little 3-inch tall snowman that turned into slush. And this left a scar. That forever after I was destined to spend the rest of my life obsessed with making up for that moment of sheer childhood trauma.
Right.
Um, and of course, I over exaggerate the trauma, but still, so I fell in love with snow, and I think it played a part in why I fell in love with the mountains, and because the snow
Hmm.
fell on them in winter more than it did back in the suburbs, and I could play at being a polar explorer in snowy places. And so I guess that's where the love of snow began.
Yeah.
I always, liked getting out into it. I enjoyed winter camping, even though it, of course, had a fairly high range, high spectrum of physical discomforts that went along.
Oh, you see, you've not experienced a hot tent. You see, that's where you're slipping up. You see.
We'll get to that. And
Go on
in
then.
many ways, it spoils the podcast completely, but I may even have to concede a defeat to your hot tent in terms of sheer comfort. But maybe not. There are
Maybe
ways that
not. No, we'll
is good.
see. We'll see.
So anyway, I ramble sometimes, so I'll try and cut this long story short. As you know, I went for some very long hikes
Yes.
when I was in my 20s. The longest had me living outside an entire winter from one end and then out the other, and then
Right.
back into another winter before that walk up Europe even ended. But then after that, I wasn't quite done, and I came to North America to do another long walk. During that, in 2000, I met a woman who I fell in love with, who's now my wife. I ended up moving here to where she lives in Colorado rather than
Right.
her moving to London. It wasn't a hard decision.
No, I don't. I wouldn't imagine it is.
Well, because they have snow here in winter, even down in the foothills where I live, we get snowfalls that measure in multiple feet, not
Wow.
just 2 inches. 2 inches
Yeah,
isn't a
yeah.
big snowfall. It's why did you even bother? So yeah, we get multiple feet, and I would still camp in it in winter, and spend most of the trips battling to stay comfortable because it really is an effort, as you know.
Yes, yes.
Camping in the wet. The hardest thing is keeping things dry. It's not the cold, it's not the
Yeah,
snow, it's the
yeah,
fact that
yeah.
everything gets wet.
That's right.
Eventually, I had kids, which of course changed my life even more than marriage. And I no longer let myself go on long, multi-month backpacking adventures because I wanted to put my family first until they no longer needed me,
Hmm.
which incidentally we're almost at, which is very exciting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, indeed. My oldest is 20, and so my youngest is almost 17, and so the time when I can resume to multi-month walks is rapidly approaching. I had kids, and they reached an age where playing outside in the snow was something fun to do, and so I started building little snow shelters in the garden with them.
Right,
You'd build a big pile of snow, and then you'd hollow it out and crawl inside, and then I started building snow shelters using cooler tubs. I'd pack snow into these cooler tubs and then knock it out and use those blocks to build
right.
walls. And you'd make this big dome of highly dubious shape and strength. That was a fun thing to do in the yard and play with in the kids. And then you could go inside and have a warm hot chocolate and recover nicely. It never crossed my mind that igloos would be a viable wilderness shelter. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't, right? You think of igloos as an Arctic thing
Yes.
that's practiced by the Inuit.
Hmm.
And you think of it as a dying practice too. Reportedly, building igloos when they go hunting and fishing isn't really something they do much anymore. It's almost a dying art.
Yeah, yeah.
So it never crossed my mind that someone could camp in an igloo and have a good time doing it until I picked up a copy of the Great Outdoors magazine and a story in it by Chris Townsend, who
Oh,
I'm sure
yeah,
your
yeah.
readers
No,
know.
Chris. Yeah, yeah.
Influential backpacker with 29 books to his name who's done these incredible journeys. He wrote a story about going for I think it was 10-night backpacking trip in Yellowstone National Park in the middle of winter. And he and his companions stayed in igloos during it, which
Right.
was the first time I'd read and heard of someone doing such a thing. And I thought that was interesting. What was really interesting was that Chris Townsend described the igloo camps as comfortable and warm,
Okay.
which was like, holy crap, if I can say that on your show.
Oh, yeah, you
I almost said something else.
can.
I skied across Yellowstone in winter 2001, and it was minus 35 at night, and it was
Ouch.
miserable. It was really hard, right at the limits of what my gear could cope with. And I would definitely not describe my camps as warm and comfortable.
Right.
But Chris described his igloo camps as warm and comfortable, which definitely made me sit up and take note. And so to make his igloos, he'd used a tool called the icebox, which had actually been designed by one of his companions on that trip, someone enigmatically named Igloo Ed,
Okay.
which is a great name, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
With his partner Guy Menge, he'd spent decades, building snow shelters and ice cabins, such like, and developed this amazing tool, which is basically a three-sided box fixed to an extendable pole that you pack snow into and make the blocks in place, and then you spiral up and finish with this perfect igloo dome. And I did my own research after Chris's story. I found the websites selling the igloo tool, and then I found Igloo Ed on social media,
Uh-huh.
and friended him the way you do.
Right.
He turned out, amazingly, to live only an hour from where I lived in Colorado.
All
And he turned
right.
out to be a very down to earth and approachable man. And so I commented on his amazing photos of the igloos he'd built. He built igloos in so many places, on top of mountains in winter where you wouldn't normally want to camp because they're so windy. And
Yeah, yeah.
there was even there was pictures of igloos in parking lots and outside outdoor clothing stores, and even one in Central Park, I think. So just all these amazing igloo pictures and pictures of people building igloos of all ages and sizes, having a great old time in the kind of severe conditions that you wouldn't think you'd be sitting there with a big grin on your face.
Not really, no.
Anyway, we exchanged comments, and he was very generous in his comments about my little igloos I'd built in my, front garden in the deep Front Range snow. And eventually, in January 2016, he sent me an unexpected message saying, "Hey, how do you fancy coming into Rocky Mountain National Park and building an igloo with me?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Why not?" That was the introduction to building an igloo. I got to go into Colorado's wilderness
Right.
with Igloo Ed, the developer, the icebox tool, which was just about perfect because if anyone could build an igloo, I had to trust the person who invented the
Yeah.
tool. So that was where it began. I'll be honest, when we got to the trailhead on the rigid January morning. Everything is covered by deep snow and ice. And it's weird. I think trailhead parking areas are the coldest places on the planet. For some
Okay.
reason, maybe it's because you've just gotten out of a car, which
Yeah.
which is, hot. Suddenly you step into a place there where the temperature is minus 15 Celsius, minus 20. They always seem to be ridiculously windy, these parking lots too.
Right.
And so I stepped out of it. I knew we were heading into the wilderness to sleep. I didn't have a tent in my rucksack. I knew I was going into the mountains for the first time with this older gentleman who I'd never met, who didn't really look especially tough. Igloo Ed is a shortish man. He has a long white beard. He looks a little like Gandalf or Dumbledore rolled
Okay.
into one,
Okay.
which is very appropriate, the way he looks like a magician, because the way he can bend snow to his command makes him a little bit of a snow wizard. But he didn't look like someone I really wanted to necessarily trust my life to in the middle of the wilderness. But anyway, I committed to this journey. So we snowshoed into the woods. We followed a route that Igloo Ed has followed, I don't know, hundreds of times over the past 20 to 30 years. It's like he has this secret off-trail journey to a hidden part of a national park that he knows like the back of his hand. And it soon became apparent while walking with him that he knew the mountains like the back of his hand. He knew what he was doing out there. He had a story for every twist and turn of the trail because he'd followed it, all these years with so many different characters.
Yeah.
Eventually, we picked a spot deep in the wilderness, and you walk into the middle of this spot, but even on snowshoes, you sink thigh deep because the Colorado snow is so soft and powdery. It's not like British mountain snow that instantly, turns into wet, sugary snow and you can walk
Yeah.
across it. It's really dry and soft. And the idea of being able to make an igloo from this powdery snow it stretches the bounds of credibility. You can't even pick up the snow and make a snowball from it. It's plainly ridiculous. But Igloo Ed, because he knows how to work snow, demonstrated first off by carefully stamping the snow down and then shoveling more snow into it and then stamping it down and shoveling it in and then letting it set, demonstrated how to turn this, 5 feet of powder into a 9, 10 foot wide solid snow platform that's set like concrete.
Right.
And then he demonstrated how to put his icebox tool together, slotting the panels that make the three-sided box into one piece and fixing the pole to it, and demonstrated the process of disturbing just enough snow to fill each block, just how hard enough to compress the snow so that it locked up, and then how long to leave it so it's set. And before my eyes, I watched this igloo, take form as the blocks spiraled up in a going round, and then the next layer began, and you spiral up until you finish with this 8 foot wide quaternary dome, essentially shaped like a medieval cathedral. So it becomes self-supporting.
Okay.
And so we built this wonderful dome. It took a long time. It was a lot of work. It took us most of a day, and we didn't actually finish until just after it had gotten dark.
Right.
So it's a process. It's a lot of work, and of course it was slow because Igloo Ed was teaching me how to move the snow about and how to pack it into the icebox. So he can build. He's built one with friends in 3 hours. I've never managed to do it that quickly. It always takes.
Right. Can I ask
Um,
one question? I've always wondered how much skill would you say it actually takes to build an igloo? Is it a very skillful process?
I would say it's reasonably skillful. Some people have failed. I think it's quite hard to fail if you think about what you're doing and you just work at it. There are some basic tools, basic tricks in terms of how you use the tool, in terms of when you're filling the box, where you push the snow down and how hard you push it, and making sure you have the angles right.
Right.
It does
Okay. So
take
it's a process. You really need someone to show you how to do it by the sound of it.
many people, if the tool comes with a little booklet, and I
Oh,
think
right. Okay.
And I think if you practice a little bit at home, making a few blocks before you go, and of course, I know it's not really the ideal tool for United Kingdom at all because you rarely
No.
have enough snow
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
it to be a viable, mountain camping tool. And also, you really want it to stay cold for a while
Yeah.
so that you can maximize the benefit you get from spending a day building an igloo. Because I know sometimes you get a decent fall of snow and you might build your igloo, and then 2 days later,
It's always,
becomes
yes.
warm and moist, and then the igloo doesn't last the way it does here in a cold mountain environment.
No. And how comfortable is it actually in any? You said it was going to be warm and comfortable. Tell me how warm and comfortable it is.
Well, so that's the thing. That first igloo camp, looking at the igloo from the outside, I thought, oh, it's going to be like an ice box, as
Yeah,
the tool
yeah.
is named. It looked like it was going to be small and dark and claustrophobic inside.
Right.
So even though we built this solid thing, and even though I do trust what Chris Townsend had written, that it was going to be warm and comfortable, I couldn't get over my instinctive hesitance to spend a night in the damn thing. But stepping into it for the first time was kind of a revelation. Igloo had built a trench into it, so the entrance was below the platform floor level.
Right.
But there was also a walkway into it as well, which meant you could stand up tall in the igloo. You didn't have to stoop, and you could sit down on the platform with your feet in the trench. So instantly, it was shockingly spacious. It was like the TARDIS inside to
Right.
my
Right. 'Cause-
um,
yeah.
and no winter camp had ever been something I could stand up in, and move around and swing my arms and sit in comfort. I was always, lying on a camping mat and
I think being able to
always
stand up
unpleasant.
makes
And
makes a
so
huge
once
difference, doesn't it?
once Igloo Ed got his little butane heater, his lantern going, and once we were sat in it on camping mats and all our stuff was moved in, the temperature inside soon warmed up into the low 50s.
Right.
There was a little hole in the top so that an airflow would continue running through it. You'd have air come in through the entrance and
Right.
it would flow through the top at exactly 3.5 miles an hour, according
Ah,
to Igloo Ed. Because, of course,
okay.
being a snow scientist and developer of it all, he'd measured every single aspect of what he created. And so you get oxygen flowing in, you get airflow. And so the temperature outside was about minus 20 Celsius.
Right.
The wind was blowing a hoolie, but inside, lit with the orange light of his lantern and the warmth from our bodies and the warmth from our camping stoves, you could take off your gloves and hats and just sit there in shirt sleeves and move around almost. I mean, no, it's not a hotel, but it
No,
felt
but it's
so outrageously cozy compared to every other winter camp I'd ever had.
right.
Um,
And presumably it's quiet as well, is it?
yeah, not completely silent. You could hear coyotes outside when they howl. You could hear the wind rushing through the pines to a small degree,
Right.
but only like a background murmur. Igloo Ed also created a fabric door that hangs down in the entrance. It kind of helps
Right.
to maintain
Right.
heat. It helps to maintain some heat. You leave a little gap at the bottom so the airflow continues. When you step through that door outside, you can be like, oh my goodness, it's miserable out here. It's really rough. And sometimes, Colorado winters at their worst really are savage. They're not worse than Scottish winters because they're not damp.
Yeah.
We don't have
Yeah.
I've been colder in Britain than I've ever been colder in Colorado,
Yeah.
despite the
Yeah.
extreme temperatures here.
Yeah.
But when you're in an igloo, you don't notice it. But they're not dark the way you'd think. The snow walls they're 8 inches thick, and snow is very translucent, as
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
know. And so moonlight and even starlight shines through it. And in
Okay.
sunlight during the day, they glow like you're in this fabulous glowing glassy receptacle. They're actually really fun. They're
Okay.
very, very cheery. So they're warm and solid. I mean, that's the beauty. No matter how well you pitch any kind of tent,
Hmm.
even a hot tent, and we can start doing comparisons in a
Yeah,
moment, I
sure.
suppose. The best tent in the world is still going to flap
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
windstorm.
That's right.
And if it's pouring with rain, or whatever, or hail, you'll hear it in a tent. In an igloo, you're as snug as a bug in a rug inside that thing.
Okay.
The worst winds the mountains can throw at you aren't going to knock it down.
Right. Right. It's pretty indestructible once it's up, I'm
I mean,
sure.
yeah, the morning after a night in an igloo, once it's frozen solid, because basically it will freeze inside, it will thaw a little bit inside. Your body heat and the warmth will
Yeah,
create
yeah.
this, layer of ice coating the inside that usually freezes solid overnight while you sleep. And then in the morning you can climb up and stand on top of the igloo and it's not going to collapse.
Wow.
They're solid. So you basically have an indestructible shelter. Obviously, it's not
Okay.
going to be indestructible if you've pitched it underneath a crag and a bunch of rocks fall on top of it. So,
No, no.
or an avalanche, running at 100 miles an hour or 200 miles an hour it would
It's
probably
going to
wipe it
take it
out.
away.
But
Obviously, it is. Yeah, yeah.
unlike a hot tent. So is the indestructibleness and the quietness at night a point towards the igloo or a point towards a hot tent?
I think the igloo wins in terms of quiet. You're right. We've only got about 10 minutes left, so I'll just talk a little bit about the hot tent. Now I'll go into that. Just to give people an idea, a hot tent is based on a Scandinavian design, really. It's basically a canvas bell tent, and the amazing thing about it is that you have a wood burning stove that fits in, and chimney that goes up through the tent. Now, I'm sure, I'm absolutely confident that a hot tent will be an igloo hands down for heat because you really can. It's not a warm tent; it's a hot tent. And the ideal conditions for a hot tent really are still and very cold. Certainly -20 really isn't an issue in a hot tent at all. And you did talk about the rain. What I found it's a tent teepee, my tent. What I've found is that they're pretty well impervious to rain because the stove it creates a sort of circulation, an air circulation. They're only a single skin tent, and they're nothing like the sort of lightweight tents that we have. I got into the hot tent basically just as we were coming out of COVID, when the bothies that I had to visit were closed, and really I wasn't sure whether those bothies would ever reopen, and I wasn't sure even if they did reopen whether they'd kind of be safe to use anymore. Just didn't know what the situation was going to be. So I saw the hot tent. I wanted to find a comfortable way of camping in winter. And like you were saying, Andrew, one of the major problems for camping in Britain is that you get wet. Once you're wet in a tent, very, very hard to get dry if you're talking about what we've come to use in Britain as the sort of the lightweight tents that we've got. Once you're wet, you're going to stay wet, really, unless you can go to a pub and dry out or something. The hot tent wins sort of hands down over that because you can hang your clothes up, you can crank the stove up, and you'll be dry in the morning. There's no question about that. The issue with a hot tent is actually not getting it to produce enough heat. It's stopping it from roasting you, basically.
Yeah,
But the
I
downside is that, like you say, if it's windy, the tent that I've got will withstand 60-mile-an-hour winds. I don't think you'd get much sleep. Is that fair enough?
yes,
So,
I've actually slept in a hot tent now, and
oh
um, I had
right,
I had a friend who built one, and I got to spend some time in it. And yes, he had the temperature up into 20, 25
yeah,
Celsius,
yeah.
and we were sitting there, the fire crackling, the stove crackling, drinking whiskey. And I have to be
That's
honest,
the
it was one
idea.
of the best camping experiences of my life, and I actually
Yeah.
want a hot tent too because yeah, and I don't think you can really dry your equipment in an igloo the way you can in a hot tent because obviously you don't want to get it up that hot because
No,
then the
no,
igloo might
no, you
start to
wouldn't.
slap, to fall in around you. So I give you that point. You win on the hot tent warmth. So
The downside of a hot tent is, of course, I think my setup cost about 3 grand. I'm guessing
ah,
your igloo wasn't quite as expensive as that.
yeah, I think the igloo tool costs about £300, something maybe slightly less. And of course, in UK you have to get it shipped to you from America.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Here's an interesting one, which again doesn't really apply to the United Kingdom, but here in Colorado, I can build an igloo and I can leave it, and it will be there if I built it in a good spot for 2 to 3 months.
Oh,
And it won't
right. Yeah.
shrink. It will be this solid wilderness backcountry shelter that I can retreat to. I can go back and be certain that I have a solid wilderness cabin that will just be there waiting for me. I don't have to drag I don't
That's
have to drag
that's
the tool in again.
And of course, that's
So
another
that's a
issue,
very
really. I think with the igloo wins, I have to admit that a hot tent is not the most portable item around. You know, you're lugging around a stove and a big heavy tent, so it does have that problem as well, you know?
How much does your full setup of tent and stove
Well, the stove
weigh?
is
Not
about,
obviously all
I
the
think the
other.
stove's about 20 kilograms and the tent's about 12. But of course, I have carpets and also, you know, and my chair and all that sort of stuff to lug about. So it's, you can, yeah, if it's a reason, what I've got is got one of those garden carts that you can haul stuff about in. So you can get some distance from the road if it's a reasonable track you can trundle your stuff away. And if you're really dedicated, yes, you could backpack away. You know, you'd probably have a bit of difficulty getting much more than a mile from the road, but you could do it.
So the icebox tool weighs, oh goodness, I only know it's in pounds. I think it's just over 5 pounds.
Right, right, right. So you can carry that anywhere, can't you?
Yeah, you strap it on the back of your backpack and then you can hike. You could walk all day if you needed to.
Yeah, see, that's a big difference. And of course, well, one of the other side of it is, of course, you do need snow. Where
Well, exactly, yes.
that is a problem, particularly in the UK.
Yeah, I think we have a clear direction we're heading in terms of what's best for the United Kingdom and what's
Probably, yeah.
potentially more usable in snowier places.
Well, yeah. What I would say though is that things are changing. I think the one of the issues with global warming is that people are hyper vigilant about fire risks these days. So going into anywhere that you've got a fire, even though it's contained, I think you're likely to be a bit unpopular. And the other issue I've noticed is that because I think our winters are a lot windier than they used to be. And so you are facing wind. Really, for a hot tent to be in its ideal situation, you want no wind and for it to be as cold as you can get it. So it's not always ideal now. I'm not using my hot tent as much as I did when I first got it because conditions are changing.
Mm.
So that's one of the issues. So yeah, I think to round things up, I'm sure you're right. I think I would agree with you that the hot tent is by far the most comfortable camping experience I've ever had, and it has what I like about the hot tent is it has a kind of atmosphere to it. And, the canvas and you feel like you could well be a prospector in the gold rush in a tent like that. Really, it was a bit
That
like.
crackling, that crackling fire going on in the background and the glow when you open the door to put the wood in. You
Yeah.
can't beat that. I
No, you can't.
agree.
It has
I
a lovely
totally,
smell.
totally.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. We're almost out of time now. Listen, it's been fascinating in talking to you, and I really wish I could be in Colorado one day and share an igloo with you, and perhaps you can pop over
That
here
would be amazing.
and we
I
can
hope
share a tent
I
together.
I hope we make that happen because it would
We
be
were,
I love introducing people to iglooing, just like Igloo Ed did with me. Seeing people experience an igloo for the first time is truly wonderful.
yeah, but especially your idea about drinking whiskey in one. Anyway, okay, thanks very much, Andrew. We're gonna have to go because the gods of time have come down on us. Thanks very much. Great talking to you.
Wonderful, John. Thank you.